This is the Business Owners IT Podcast with Anthony Garish and Ryan Carter, where tomorrow's technology meets today's conversation.
Hi, I'm Tony Garish.
And I'm Ryan Carter, and this is the Business Owners IT Podcast.
A podcast where we discuss tips, tricks, and solutions for business owners involving all things tech.
So, we're going to go ahead and continue with our series on CIS Controls. Today's going to be Control 3, Data Protection. That'll be to develop processes and technical controls to identify, classify, securely handle, retain, and dispose of data. And with this one today, we'll have some key takeaways talking about data management, access control list, encryption, logging, and disposal of that data. So Tony, why don't you go ahead and take us through?
Sure. So one of the key aspects is data classification. So, we're looking at like PII, personal but identifiable information, CUI, which is, you're looking at, that part of CMMC where they have the CUI. That's another kind of data classification. We get into data encryption at rest, data encryption in transit, data encryption, through when sharing data, even data encryption on your little USB drive that you hand out. Data access control is another part of data, right? Who can have access to that data? Who has access to that data? Why do they have access? What do they do with that data? Why do they need it? You got data loss prevention, right? That's how do we prevent data from being lost or stolen in transmission, at rest, by employees. And then you also got data retention and disposal. I mean, I worked at some big companies where they had data retention. After 7 years, they didn't want that data, right?
Yeah.
Because it could come back and, potentially be a lawsuit, in the future. Then you get up into backup and recovery. How do we back up? Where do we back up this data? How do we recover it? And then monitoring, auditing. How do you monitor and audit the data that's out there? Like who's seeing it, and are you able to see who's seeing it, who's accessing it, where's it going, that type of stuff. So the goal is to protect sensitive data from unauthorized access, modifications, or exfiltration. That's a hard word, exfiltration, ensuring its confidential integrity and availability. So we could dive into each one of these a little bit more. Maybe Ryan, we could talk a little bit about data classification and what's available in, the Microsoft 365 to help with that.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Microsoft 365 has data loss protection, and a lot of people these days are using SharePoint. They're putting their data on SharePoint. And if you really look back in the earlier days, it's still going on. I mean, obviously we used to keep and still keep our data on servers. And the way we used to do that is we had access control lists where we would limit the access of people to certain data. There might be like a common area where everyone can get into and see something that's common to the entire company. But there might be stuff that's a little bit more sensitive for the company, maybe drawings or, your business data, from business meetings and what you're planning on doing going forward, or accounting data. So you wanted to block that access. And in SharePoint, that's a little bit more different than it used to be. And I have a feeling from looking at a lot of SharePoint sites that people aren't using it to block that data, so people are getting more access into that data. So, the people that shouldn't be getting access. So that's one thing we want to look at doing.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, one of the things I think that you can do in SharePoint is say, okay, anything with the social security number can't be emailed externally,
yes.
Right? So maybe you allow it to be internal communication because it's never leaving your Exchange server, but externally we don't let it go.
Yep.
Or the same thing with CUI. Right, we can have it talk internally on our systems, as long as you're in GCC High, and then don't allow that to leave unless it's to the known place.
Yeah, and you can also tag that data as critical, high importance, so it can't be emailed out, or certain people can't get to it unless they have access to those tags. So Microsoft's doing some really great things. We just got to make sure that we're actually doing them.
Yeah. So this control really focuses on, securing your data. So you have data encryption, right? So there's different types of data encryption. Maybe you can elaborate on some of it.
BitLockers are number one.
Yeah. So BitLocker, that's part of Microsoft Suite, right? You can BitLocker your computer so that the data is encrypted. So if your hard drive or if your computer's stolen, or somebody takes out your hard drive and tries to read it, they can't read it unless they have the encryption keys to decrypt it.
Yep.
Also, data at rest, so your backups and stuff, right? That data needs to be, if it's out on the internet, when it's sitting at rest, you need to have it encrypted.
Yep.
So people can't access that data. Like if the server's hacked, right? So you guys hear about servers being hacked all the time. They grab your chunk of data, but they can't read it because it's encrypted.
When you talk about data in the cloud and backups, there's also a big word we always use called immutable.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, immutable backup means that it's disconnected, that there's no way if you get malware or something like that that can attack it. It's totally disconnected. They're also called, they have other words for that too, but basically it's in multiple places. It's not accessible from the computer network that's of the data that's being backed up.
So say I have company A and your company B, your backup would never be able to see my backup if there was some type of malware, or if you're the company that is providing the data backup, you guys can't see my backups.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Data retention and disposal, again, that can be also, this is part of this CIS control. I mean, it can be important, especially if you're a company that's in a high risk area and, you just keep the data as long as you can to help protect the company. I know it sounds bad, but I mean, it's true, right? So, if you had some data that's no longer needed, you say this is your retention policy and then you get rid of it. And get rid of it doesn't mean just copying it off and storing it. It means get rid of it so it's no longer available.
Yeah. So you want to establish a data lifecycle plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with that lifecycle plan, we usually I see about 6 stages usually, which is your creation of that data, and then possibly storing that data, and then using the data, sharing it, and then deciding when you want to archive that data, and then finally destroy that data, dispose of it in some way.
Yeah. And then again, I'm not going to get a whole lot into the backup and recovery because there's a whole section in CIS about disaster recovery, incident response, and that, so we can probably skip over that. But the other thing with data is that's what your business is, right? So what are we really securing? Most businesses, their data is very important to them. That this data, you don't want your competitor seeing it. You certainly don't want your competitor seeing your email. Email is data. You have files. You have all these different files, right? You also have drawings and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's an important control, and it's it's pretty high up in the list, right, compared to some of the other controls.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say about this? I don't think so.
Well, I mean, we didn't talk too much about it, but actually, you're monitoring and auditing of that data.
I skipped that one. Yeah.
What's a good way as a business owner that I could, monitor that data to see where it's in and out?
So that's a good question, right? So we use ThreatLocker, right? I mean, ThreatLocker storage control is an awesome tool. I mean, using that tool, we can monitor every single file, what's happening to it, changes, who read it, who wrote it, who deleted it, who copied it. I mean, everything is there, like in ThreatLocker's storage control. So that's what we use, right? So that's a tough one, right? Monitoring, auditing. So what tools? I mean, you can use the Microsoft, but it's pretty hard to follow that stuff, right? You can't really search it. It's really difficult. Microsoft does have file auditing, and it would go into your normal event viewer, but a tool like ThreatLocker has it there for you. The real thing cool about ThreatLocker is that we can actually stop people, right, from ThreatLocker. We can stop people even with the Windows credentials. So let's say you had a local administrator, but you're the CEO and you don't want local administrators in your business looking at your data. We can actually use that to stop them. So it also does the monitoring, right? We can use it for auditing, and it's just an awesome tool.
Yeah, and Microsoft does do a pretty good job with it, but the thing is you also pay for it. If you already have ThreatLocker and you're paying for it, there is a trade-off, but you do have to understand sometimes with your licensing with Microsoft, especially if you have what's called a P1 license, you're actually able to monitor or keep those logs for 30 days.
Yeah.
Everything else before that is, I think, 10 days or best effort. I can't remember the exact words behind it. So you do have some type of logging with Microsoft, but obviously, you can go a little top tier and use ThreatLocker.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing with Threat Locker too, they have a retention for log data too, but I think you can buy more.
Yeah. And going back to that data lifecycle I talked about, it's one thing too as a business owner to remember, it costs money to store your data and to protect that data. And if you're paying that money to stuff you don't need, maybe it's time to clean house a little bit and figure out what you need to keep and go.
Yep.
And if you keep it, it also, like Tony said, opens your company up to any type of legal liability.
Yep. All right, I don't really have any more about this control. I mean, I think it's important. Obviously, it's control number 3. It is your business, so
okay.
Unless you have something.
No, we could just give a quick, the tip or the takeaway here is, take inventory where your data is, control its access, delete what is not needed, log your access to it, and encrypt everything that you possibly can. That's.
I mean, and also to add to that, you need to know where your data's at, right? Because if your data's on some salesman's laptop that's sitting in the back of his car and not, in the cloud or on your servers, then, something happens to that laptop or that guy deletes it, you lose access to it.
Yeah, he takes it with him to a Bears game and it gets stolen.
And he takes it with the Bears game and gets stolen. That's a good example.
So we're going to continue our series with control number 4 in our next episode, and that'll be secure configuration of enterprise assets and software.
Thank you for tuning in to the Business Owners IT Podcast. See you next week.
See you next week.
Unique Computing Solutions. Your IT challenges solved.